Okay, so imagine for a second that your deepest, most cherished faith and your sharpest, most logical reason are in an all-out war with each other. Well, that was the reality in the 12th century for Moses Maimonides, a doctor, a community leader, and a philosopher who dared to try and build a bridge between these two worlds. And in this explainer, we're going to dive into how he took on one of the biggest intellectual showdowns in history. And really, this is the question that drove his entire life's work. Can the profound, revealed truths of religion actually stand side by side with the cold, hard logic of philosophy? For Maimonides, this wasn't just some abstract puzzle to think about. This was everything. This slide just lays out the clash of worlds perfectly. On one side, you've got revelation, the God of Abraham, the truth of the Torah. It's personal, it's specific. And on the other side, you've got reason, championed by Aristotle, with his idea of an impersonal, unmoved mover, sort of a cosmic first domino. These weren't just two different flavors of truth. They were totally different ways of seeing the universe, and they were on a collision course. And this massive collision created what Maimonides himself called the Great Perplexity. It was a genuine crisis of faith for the sharpest minds of his era. I mean, put yourself in their shoes. You're a devout believer, but you're also totally blown away by the power of Greek logic and science that's sweeping through the intellectual world. What do? How can you possibly reconcile what you believe in your heart with what you can prove with your mind? This feeling of being torn into, this perplexity, that's the exact problem Maimonides set out to solve. Now, to really get his solution, you first have to understand the man himself, because his philosophy wasn't dreamed up in some quiet, cozy library. Oh no, it was forged in the fire of exile and constant chaos. Just look at his life story here. It's a total roller coaster. He's born in Cordoba during its intellectual golden age, this amazing hub of learning. But then boom, by the time he's 10, his family is forced to run for their lives from religious extremists. After years on the move, he finally lands in Egypt, where he becomes this incredible figure, a famous doctor and the leader of the entire Jewish community. That journey, from a privileged scholar to a refugee and then to a leader, gave him a perspective that almost no one else had. So, how did he do it? How did he build that bridge? Well, his first move was incredibly bold. He went right to the source and decided to completely redefine the concept of God in his masterpiece, The Guide for the Perplexed. He brings in this pretty radical idea called negative theology. And the principle behind it is actually pretty simple, but it's profound. Our minds, our language, they're human-sized, finite. God, by definition, is infinite. So when we try to say God is wise, we're using our own tiny, limited concept of wisdom. It's like trying to describe the entire ocean by holding up a single thimble of water. We just end up limiting God with our words. So here's the crucial pivot. Maimonides says, instead of trying to say what God is, the only truly honest thing we can do is say what God is not. He's not physical. He's not emotional in the way we are. He's not made up of different parts. For Maimonides, describing God with human characteristics wasn't just inaccurate, it was a form of intellectual idolatry. You can see his method here. It's really a process of purification. You just systematically strip away everything that's an imperfection, everything that's a limitation. God is not weak. God is not ignorant. And as you clear away all the things he isn't, you're left with this purer, more profound understanding of a perfect, unified being. This was a God that a philosopher could finally get on board with. But okay, that brings up a new problem, right? How does this super abstract philosophical God connect to the daily life of an ordinary person? Well, for Maimonides, the answer was surprisingly down to earth. It was the law. And this is where you can really see his genius at work. He wrote these two massive books. On one hand, you have The Guide for the Perplexed, which is the deep philosophical why. It's for the intellectual elites. But then you have the Mishneh Torah, which is the practical how, a step-by-step guide to Jewish law for absolutely everyone. They're two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. See, for Maimonides, all the religious commandments weren't just random rules sent from on high. Nope, they had a clear, rational purpose. First, they create a stable, just, and healthy society. That's the welfare of the body. But more importantly, that well-run society acts as the perfect training ground, the framework you need to pursue the ultimate goal for any human, the perfection of the soul through an intellectual understanding and love of God. And he summed up this entire journey with a brilliant metaphor he created, the parable of the palace. All right, so picture a palace. The king, representing God, is in the deepest, innermost room. Most people are just wandering around outside the palace walls. Now, some people make it into the courtyards. These are the folks who follow the law, but maybe just out of habit, without really getting the deeper meaning. And that's a great start. But to get into the antechambers, closer to the king, you have to start studying, using your intellect. And to get all the way into the throne room itself, well, Maimonides says that's reserved for the true philosopher, the person who achieves the highest possible understanding of God through reason. So the law gets you through the palace gates, but it's reason that gets you into the throne room. As you can imagine, this idea that only a few elite thinkers could truly know God wasn't just new. It was explosive, and it left behind a legacy of both deep reverence and really intense controversy. His influence was just off the charts. He was the very first person to ever systematize Jewish beliefs into a simple creed. He boiled it all down to just 13 core principles of faith, and they were so foundational, they're still printed in traditional Jewish prayer books to this very day. But oh man, the backlash was fierce. On the one hand, he was celebrated as the Great Eagle, a genius who even influenced Christian thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. But on the other, he was accused of smuggling dangerous Greek philosophy into Judaism, of undermining the simple, pure faith of the average person. The debate got so heated that his books were actually publicly burned in France just a few decades after he died. And all this kind of brings us to a final thought. Maimonides dedicated his life to forging a path for the perplexed people of his time, insisting that a deep faith has nothing to fear from reason. So the question for us is, in our own age, with our own struggles between science and tradition, between belief and evidence, does that path he lit so long ago still offer a way forward?